They say a sniper's greatest enemy isn't the target, it's doubt. Sarah Catherine Brennan learned this truth at 19 years old, standing on a firing line at Camp Lejeune, with 47 men watching her every move. She learned it again at 31, earning her instructor's tab, while half the cadre whispered she didn't belong. And at 37, driving through Virginia Beach on a Tuesday morning in May, she was about to learn it one more time. The alarm had gone off at 05:30. Sarah's hand found the button in the dark with the same mechanical precision she brought to everything. No fumbling, no hesitation, just smooth economy of motion. In the bathroom mirror, her reflection showed what it always showed: a woman who looked 10 years younger than her age, 5'4" and bare feet, delicate features that had caused problems her entire adult life. The kind of face that made people think school teacher or librarian, not Navy SEAL instructor with a confirmed training record of 1,480 meters. She stared at her hands under the fluorescent light. Steady. They were always steady now. It had taken years to make them that way, and even more years to trust them. The briefing at Naval Special Warfare Group wasn't until 1100 hours. That gave her 3 hours to complete the errand Master Chief Garrett Blackwood had assigned yesterday: find a precision rifle system for the new arrivals coming into the team next month. Something reliable, something proven, something that would hold zero after 1,000 rounds, and a helicopter insertion. The kind of rifle that didn't fail when lives hung in the balance. Check out Precision Arms on Atlantic Avenue, Blackwood had told her, his gray-threaded hair catching the light in the team room. Rook Aldridge runs it, former Marine Scout sniper. He'll have what we need. Sarah had nodded, made note of the address, said nothing about the small knot of tension that formed in her stomach at the name. Aldridge, she knew that name. Knew it from a hot afternoon in North Carolina 18 years ago, from a petition with 32 signatures, from a lesson about assumptions that had cost her sleep for months afterward. But that was 18 years ago. People changed, people learned. Or so she told herself as she pulled on the sundress, light blue cotton, the kind of thing that felt like armor in reverse. No uniform today, no rank insignia, no trident pin, no visual cues that might smooth the path. Just Sarah Brennan, civilian, on a Tuesday morning, walking into a gun shop that catered to military and law enforcement professionals. Sometimes you had to let people show you who they were before you showed them who you were. It was a lesson she'd learned from Senior Chief William Barrett, and like everything he'd taught her, it had proven true more times than she could count. The drive to Precision Arms took 20 minutes through spring traffic. Sarah parked her truck, a 15-year-old Ford Ranger that had seen better days, but started every morning without complaint, and sat for a moment with the engine off, studying the storefront through the windshield. The shop occupied a corner lot, red brick and plate glass, American flag hanging from a pole above the entrance. Through the window she could see display cases, rifles mounted on walls, the familiar organized chaos of a serious gun shop. 3 customers visible inside, all male, all with the particular posture of men who'd spent time in uniform. Sarah checked her watch. 08:47 hours. She'd timed this deliberately early enough that the shop wouldn't be crowded, late enough that the owner would be fully into his morning rhythm. Details mattered. Timing mattered. In her line of work, everything mattered. She opened the truck door and stepped into the May sunshine. The bell above the door chimed as she entered Precision Arms at 08:50 exactly. The shop smelled like gun oil and coffee, and something else she couldn't quite name, maybe the particular scent of men who'd seen combat and couldn't quite shake the alertness it bred. 3 customers turned to look at her. Behind the counter, a heavy-set man with a bushy beard and a tactical vest covered in patches straightened up from whatever he'd been examining. Thomas Rook Aldridge. Had to be. He looked exactly like what he was, former military, probably mid-50s, now the kind of man who'd been hard in his youth and was settling into a different kind of hard in middle age. His eyes did what eyes always did when Sarah walked into places like this: a quick assessment that started at her face, took in the sundress, the bare arms, the canvas shoes, and arrived at a conclusion before she'd taken 3 steps. She could practically hear the gears turning. Woman, small, dressed for brunch, not for business, probably here to buy something for a boyfriend. Probably doesn't know the difference between a magazine and a clip. Sarah had seen this expression 1,000 times. She'd stopped being angry about it somewhere around the 500th time. Now it was just data. Information about the person doing the assessing, not about her. She walked to the counter with the same quiet confidence she brought to the firing line. No hesitation, no apology in her posture. The three customers tracked her movement. Two of them had stopped their browsing entirely to watch. One was young, maybe 27, athletic build under his polo shirt. Another was older, early 30s, with the grooming and bearing of someone who took himself very seriously. The third was lean and bearded, somewhere in his late 20s, with watchful eyes that suggested more depth than the others. Sarah stopped at the counter and met Rook Aldridge's eyes directly. "I'm looking for recommendations on long-range precision rifles," she said. Her voice was clear, professional, pitched to carry without being loud. Something reliable at 1,000 yards, preferably in 308, with a quality optics system. The silence lasted perhaps 2 seconds. It felt longer. Then Rook's smirk started spreading across his face like oil on water. He exchanged glances with the customers behind her, one of those looks that men share when they think they're in on a joke together. Sarah saw it in her peripheral vision, the way you see movement when you're glassing a tree line. "Sweetheart," Rook said, and the word landed with all the weight of patronizing amusement he packed into it. "Maybe you want to start with something simpler. We've got some nice 22s in pink over there. Very beginner-friendly." Behind her, one of the customers actually chuckled. Not a quiet chuckle, either, a full-throated laugh designed to be heard. "Dave, maybe she saw it in a video game," the lean-bearded one said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Call of Duty expert right here." The laughter rippled through the shop. Three men finding themselves hilarious at 0852 on a Tuesday morning, unified in their certainty that the small woman in the sundress couldn't possibly know what she was talking about. Sarah felt her cheeks flush. The heat climbed her neck despite every year of training, every hour of controlled breathing, every moment of discipline she'd cultivated. The body remembered humiliation even when the mind had learned to process it. That was the thing they never told you about being underestimated. It didn't stop hurting just because it happened all the time. But her voice stayed level. This was the test before the test. This was the moment that revealed whether you had the discipline to maintain standards even when your ego was taking fire. "I'm not a beginner," she said, meeting Rook's eyes again. "And I know exactly what I'm looking for. Can you show me your precision rifle options? Or should it take my business elsewhere?" Rook leaned back against the wall behind the counter, crossing his arms over his tactical vest. The patches caught the light Marine Corps emblem, Scout Sniper insignia, deployment patches from Iraq. A man who'd earned his credentials the hard way and knew it. "Listen, lady," he said, and now the amusement had an edge to it, the particular edge of a man whose expertise was being questioned. "I don't know what you think you know about firearms, but long-range shooting isn't something you just pick up. It takes years of training, serious upper body strength, and honestly," he paused, letting the moment stretch, "most women don't have the focus or the patience for it." The words hung in the air like smoke. Sarah heard them, cataloged them, filed them away in the same mental space where she kept every other moment of casual dismissal she'd endured. The file was large. It had started at 19 and hadn't stopped growing. She opened her mouth to respond. The bell above the door chimed. 7 men walked in, and the atmosphere in Precision Arms changed like weather before a storm. They weren't large men, not particularly. The tallest among them was maybe 6'1", the shortest around 5'9". They wore civilian clothes, jeans and t-shirts, one in a flannel button-down despite the May warmth, another in a plain gray Henley. But they moved with a synchronization that had nothing to do with rehearsal and everything to do with thousands of hours working as a single unit. They entered through the door in a flowing pattern that put eyes on every corner of the shop within 2 seconds, that positioned them with unconscious precision to cover angles and maintain sightlines. It was the kind of movement you couldn't fake. The kind of movement that said "operator" in a language that had no words, only recognition. The 3 customers saw it. Sarah saw them see it, postures straightening, the laughing energy evaporating like water on hot steel. Behind the counter, Rook Aldridge's expression shifted from smug superiority to something else. Something that might have been recognition or might have been nervous assessment of a situation that had suddenly become complicated. The man who entered first had gray threading through his dark hair, a lean build that suggested endurance over power, and eyes that were kind until you looked closely and realized they were absolutely cold. He walked directly to Sarah with the economy of motion that marks someone who'd learned not to waste energy on unnecessary movement. Chief Brennan, he said, his voice carrying through the shop without being loud. Sorry we're late. Traffic on the interstate was brutal. Then he turned to face Rook Aldrich, and his smile was friendly in the way that a shark might be friendly, all the right shapes, none of the warmth. Master Chief Petty Officer Garrett Blackwood, he said, making it sound like a simple introduction rather than a correction of everything that had happened in the last 5 minutes. United States Navy SEALs, this is Chief Petty Officer Sarah Catherine Brennan, currently serving as our unit's primary designated marksman instructor. He let that sit for exactly 2 seconds. She holds the base record for longest confirmed training shot at 1,480 meters. She's also the person who's been training us for the past 6 months because, frankly, she's a better shot than any of us. Another pause perfectly timed. So when she asks you about precision rifles, you might want to take her seriously. The silence in the shop had texture now. It had weight. Sarah stood very still, maintaining the same composure she'd held since walking through the door, but something had shifted in her chest, not vindication exactly, more like the releasing of a breath she'd been holding without realizing it. The color drained from Rook Aldrich's face like water from a sink. Behind Sarah, the three customers who had been laughing suddenly discovered that the floor was extremely interesting. The lean-bearded one, the Call of Duty comment guy, had gone pale under his tan. The older one had his eyes locked on his shoes. The athletic younger one was staring at the wall like it held secrets of the universe. A massive man stepped forward from the group of seven. Black-built like a defensive lineman with arms that strained the sleeves of his t-shirt and eyes that had seen things that marked them permanently. Senior Chief Marcus Wellington, he said, his voice a deep rumble that filled spaces without effort. Chief Brennan qualified me on my last recertification. I've been shooting for 15 years, and she still spotted a breathing irregularity in my technique that was throwing my shots off by 2 inches at 800 yards. He paused, letting the specificity of it land. 2 inches. In case you're wondering, that's the kind of detail that saves lives in the field. Another SEAL stepped forward, younger, maybe 29 or 30, with the quiet intensity of someone who'd learned that the loudest voice in the room was usually compensating for something. He had sandy hair and blue eyes and the kind of unremarkable features that would let him disappear in a crowd, which was probably why the Navy had recruited him. Petty Officer Cole Vaughn, he said, she's not here shopping for herself, genius. She's here because we asked her to recommend equipment while you're for new guys coming into the unit. We trust her judgment more than we trust our own. Rook was stammering now, his face cycling through shades of red that suggested blood pressure issues in his future. I didn't know. I apologize. I just thought. Master Chief Blackwood cut him off, and the edge in his voice could have cut glass despite the continued politeness of his tone. You thought that because she's a woman in a sundress, she couldn't possibly know anything about firearms. You made an assumption based on absolutely nothing but her appearance. He let that sit. How many of your customers have you underestimated? How much business have you lost because you judge people before they even speak? Sarah finally spoke, her voice calm and measured in a way that had taken years to cultivate. The kind of calm that came from being in control even when everything around you was chaos. It's fine, I'm used to it. She looked directly at Rook Aldrich, and something in her eyes made him flinch despite the gentleness of her tone. This is actually why I usually shop online, but my team insisted I come here because they said you had the best selection in the area. She paused just long enough. Clearly they were wrong about the service. She turned to leave, and all 7 SEALs turned with her in perfect synchronization. It wasn't planned, it wasn't rehearsed. It was the natural response of men who'd worked together long enough that they moved as a single organism, and in that moment their movement said more than any speech could have said about who they stood with and what they thought of what had just happened. The bell chimed as Blackwood reached for the door. Wait, Rook's voice cracked slightly on the word. Please wait. Chief Brennan, I was completely out of line. I'm sorry, truly. Sarah stopped, didn't turn around immediately, let the moment breathe. When she did turn, Rook had come around the counter. He stood in the middle of his shop, surrounded by the tools of a trade he'd practiced for 30 years, looking suddenly smaller than his physical size suggested. Chief Brennan, he said again, and now the patronizing amusement was gone, replaced by something that might have been genuine shame. I was completely out of line. I'm sorry, truly. Please let me show you everything we have. No charge for the optics package. Whatever you choose, I'll personally ensure everything is exactly what you need. The silence stretched. Sarah could feel the attention of all 10 men in the shop focused on her, waiting to see what she'd do. This was a different kind of test, not the test of competence or skill, but the test of character. What do you do when someone who humiliated you offers an apology? What do you do with power when it's suddenly placed in your hands? Master Chief Blackwood leaned in slightly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Your call, Chief. We can go somewhere else. Or you can teach this guy a lesson he'll never forget. Sarah looked at Rook Aldridge. Really looked at him. She saw a man in his 50s, built solid but carrying the softness of someone who'd left active service behind, wearing his military service-like armor in the form of patches on a tactical vest. She saw someone who'd been certain of his expertise, certain of his judgments, and was now standing in the wreckage of those certainties. She thought about all the times she'd been dismissed, all the times she'd walked away to avoid confrontation, all the times she'd let it go because fighting every battle meant never having energy for the mission. But she also thought about the young women who might walk into this shop after her, the ones who didn't have 7 Navy SEALs to validate them, the ones who might believe the dismissal and turn away from their potential because someone who looked like an expert told them they couldn't do it. Okay, she said finally, but not because of the discount, because I think you just learned something important and I want to see if it sticks. The relief that crossed Rook's face was visible and immediate. He gestured toward the back wall where the precision rifles were mounted in their racks, started to lead the way, then stopped and turned back. Camp Lejeune, he said quietly, 2007, inter-service marksmanship competition. Sarah went very still. You were, Rook's voice caught slightly. You were the kid, 19 years old, beat 47 of us. The shop was absolutely silent now. Even Wellington and Blackwood had gone quiet, sensing that something was shifting beneath the surface of the conversation. I was one of the Marines who signed the protest petition. Rook continued, and the words came out like they hurt. Said your scores shouldn't count because I was female, Sarah finished for him, her voice flat. I remember. You were Staff Sergeant Aldridge then. I was wrong. Rook met her eyes, and whatever else he wasn't a coward. I was threatened by a teenager who could outshoot me. And I'm still making the same mistake 21 years later, aren't I? The mathematics of it hit Sarah like a physical thing. 21 years. She'd been 19, which made her 40 now, by his count, but she was only 37. The mistake was understandable. People always added years when they tried to reconcile memory with present. But the fact remains she'd been carrying the weight of that competition, of that petition, for 18 years. Nearly 2 decades of proving herself over and over to men who decided at first glance that she didn't belong. 18 years, she corrected quietly. I was 19 then. I'm 37 now. Rook absorbed this, and something in his expression suggested he understood the correction was about more than mathematics. Before he could respond, the door chimed again. A young woman entered, early 20s, athletic build, under her jeans and university t-shirt, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, and eyes that held a careful wariness. She stopped when she saw the crowd started to turn around. Abby, Rook called out. Honey, you don't need to, But the young woman Abby had locked eyes with Sarah, and something passed between them. Recognition, maybe. Not of each other, but of a shared experience. The experience of walking into spaces where you weren't expected and having to decide whether to fight or flee. Are you really a Navy SEAL instructor? Abby asked, ignoring her father completely. Sarah turned to face her fully. Designated marksman instructor, yes. Abby took 2 steps further into the shop, and Sarah could see the resemblance. Now she had Rook's build, his coloring, his direct way of looking at people. I want to enlist, Abby said, and her voice had the particular intensity of someone who'd been holding something in for a long time. Marine Corps, Scout Sniper Track. She glanced at her father, and the look was complicated love and frustration and something that might have been disappointment. My father says, Abby. Rook's voice held a warning. This isn't the time. But Abby pushed forward, the words coming faster now, like a breach in a dam. He says women don't have what it takes for precision shooting. That I should pick a different MOS. That I'm setting myself up for failure. She looked back at Sarah, and her eyes held a question that was bigger than the words she was speaking. I've been training for 3 years. CrossFit running shooting at the civilian range every weekend. I can do 200 push-ups without stopping. I can hold a rifle steady for 20 minutes. But he's the expert. He's been shooting for 30 years, been in combat-trained Marines. Her voice dropped slightly. Who am I to argue with that? The shop was silent again, but it was a different kind of silence now. This wasn't about Sarah being validated by her team. This was about something more fundamental, about the cost of assumptions, about the weight of expertise used as a weapon, about the difference between gatekeeping and mentoring. Sarah looked at Abby. Aldridge really looked at her, saw the calluses on her hands, the way she stood with her weight balanced, the particular alertness in her eyes that came from someone who'd spent significant time learning to shoot, saw all the markers of dedication and discipline that had nothing to do with gender and everything to do with commitment. Then she looked at Rook, and her voice was quiet but clear. What do you think you're protecting her from? Rook opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. I've seen what combat does to people, he said finally. I've seen good Marines broken by it. And I've seen, he stopped, struggled with something internal, pushed forward. I've seen women try to make it in Scout Sniper, seen them wash out, seen them hurt. I don't want that for my daughter. So you'd rather she never tried, Sarah asked. Rather she spent the rest of her life wondering what she might have been capable of. I'd rather she chose something where she could succeed. Who decides what success looks like? Sarah's voice was still quiet, but something had shifted in it. You the Marine Corps or her? Rook had no answer for that. Sarah turned back to Abby. What do you think, she asked. Not what your father thinks, not what anyone else thinks. What do you think about your own potential? Abby's voice was steady when she answered. I think he's wrong, but he's the expert. Everyone respects him. Everyone trusts his judgment. She paused and something raw showed in her face. How do I trust myself when the person who taught me everything says I'm chasing something impossible? The question hung in the air like cordite smoke. Sarah felt it settle in her chest, felt the weight of it. Because she had asked herself the same question at 19, standing on a firing line at Camp Lejeune, while 47 men and a panel of judges decided whether her scores would count. She'd asked it again at 23 during Hell Week preparation. She'd asked it at 29 when she qualified for instructor school. She'd asked it at 35 when Senior Chief William Barrett died, and she wondered if she could carry forward the lessons he taught her without him there to validate them. She'd asked it 1,000 times, and every time the answer had been the same: you trust yourself by proving yourself. Not to them, to yourself. You're someone with your own potential, Sarah said finally. That's who you are, and that's all you need to be. She looked at Rookett again, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of 18 years of proving herself to people who'd decided she couldn't do it. Your daughter has operator hands. Calloused, strong, disciplined. When's the last time you actually watched her train? Rook's face said he understood the trap of the question, even as he walked into it. I couldn't, he admitted quietly. I couldn't watch her get hurt. So you decided she would fail before she even tried, Sarah said. You decided that your fear was more important than her potential. The words were harsh, but her tone wasn't. It was the tone of someone who'd spent years learning the difference between cruelty and honesty. Master Chief Blackwood cleared his throat slightly, breaking the moment. Chief, we should probably... But Sarah held up one hand and Blackwood went quiet. She was still looking at Abby, and when she spoke again, her voice had shifted into something that might have been recognition. There's a civilian precision rifle course at Quantico next month, she said. 3 days, fundamentals, I'm teaching it. She paused, and everyone in the shop understood the weight of what she was offering. If you show up, I'll evaluate you honestly, not as your father's daughter, not as a woman trying to prove something, just as a shooter. If you've got potential, I'll tell you. If you don't, I'll tell you that too. Abby's eyes widened slightly. You'd do that? I'd do that. And if she does have potential, Rook asked, and his voice carried something that might have been hope or might have been fear. Sarah looked at him, and her expression was unreadable. Then you'll have a choice, she said. Support her or get out of her way. The bell above the door chimed as Master Chief Blackwood pulled it open, and this time when the 7 SEALs filed out, Sarah went with them. The morning sun hit her face as she stepped onto the sidewalk, and she stood there for a moment, letting the warmth soak into her skin. Behind her through the plate glass window, she could see Rook Aldridge standing in the middle of his shop, his daughter beside him, both of them looking at her. The three customers who'd been laughing had disappeared somewhere into the back. The shop looked smaller from out here, less intimidating, just another storefront on Atlantic Avenue. "That was good work in there, Chief," Blackwood said quietly, falling into step beside her as they walked toward where their vehicles were parked. "But we have a problem." Sarah felt the tension return to her shoulders. "What kind of problem?" "New guys arriving at the team next week. Command wants a live demonstration of your instruction methods. Full evaluation." The words were casual, but Sarah had worked with Blackwood long enough to hear what he wasn't saying. "Evaluation," she repeated, making it not quite a question. Word came down from group. This was Wellington coming up on her other side. "Some of the old guard are questioning the program, questioning whether having a female instructor sends the right message." Sarah stopped walking. The morning suddenly felt less warm. "So this is a test." "Everything's a test, Chief." Blackwood's voice was matter-of-fact. "You know that better than anyone." She did know it, had always known it. The difference between her and her male counterparts wasn't that she had to be competent. They all had to be competent. The difference was that she had to be competent while also constantly proving she deserved the chance to demonstrate that competence. She looked back at Precision Arms one more time. Through the window, she could see Rook talking to a young woman who just entered, different from Abby, younger, maybe nervous looking. His body language had changed, more open, more patient, actually listening instead of judging. Maybe the lesson had stuck, or maybe it would last until tomorrow and then fade like morning dew. You never really knew with people. You could only control your own actions, your own standards, your own commitment to excellence, regardless of who was watching. "When's the evaluation?" she asked. 4 weeks, Blackwood said. "Quantico range, full course demonstration. They'll be sending observers." Sarah nodded slowly, doing the mental mathematics. 4 weeks gave her time to prepare, time to ensure everything was perfect, time to identify every possible weakness and shore it up before the observers arrived. It also gave her time to teach Abby Aldridge's course, which meant the evaluation would happen with Rook's daughter in attendance. The optics of that were either perfect or terrible, depending on how it played out. "Understood," she said finally. "I'll be ready." "Never doubted it," Wellington said, and there was warmth in his voice that pushed back against the tension of the moment. They walked to their vehicles in silence. Sarah's truck looked even more worn next to the sleek SUVs the team drove, but she'd never been someone who cared about appearances. The truck ran. That was what mattered. She climbed in, started the engine, sat for a moment with her hands on the steering wheel. They were steady. They were always steady now. But she remembered a time when they weren't, remembered being 19 years old with a rifle that felt too large and a dream that felt too impossible, and hands that shook every time someone told her she didn't belong. She remembered Senior Chief William Barrett's voice, rough with cigarettes, and wisdom, saying words she'd never forgotten. Martinez. He'd called her by her mother's maiden name, an old habit from when records got confused and names got mixed up. The thing about being underestimated is it gives you an advantage. They spend all their energy judging you, which means they're not focused on their own performance. You just keep shooting. Let the targets tell the truth. She'd kept shooting. For 18 years, she'd kept shooting. And the targets had told the truth over and over in ways that no amount of skepticism could dismiss. Now she had 4 weeks to make sure they told that truth one more time. Sarah pulled out of the parking lot and headed toward the base, her mind already running through the curriculum for the Quantico course, already identifying the key moments where evaluation observers would be looking for weakness, already preparing for the test she'd known was coming eventually. Because everything was a test, and she'd been passing tests her entire life. The sun climbed higher over Virginia Beach, burning off the morning haze, and Sarah Catherine Brennan drove toward another day of proving what she'd already proven 1,000 times before, that excellence had no gender, that assumptions were the enemy of truth, and that sometimes the only way to change minds was to force them to confront their own errors in judgment. Behind her in a gun shop on Atlantic Avenue, Rook Aldridge was having a conversation with his daughter about potential and fear and the cost of protecting people from their own dreams. The conversation would last hours. It would resume tomorrow and the day after and the day after that. But it had started. That was what mattered. The lesson had begun. And in 4 weeks at Quantico, it would continue. 4 weeks passed like water through fingers. Sarah spent them the way she spent every block of time before an evaluation, methodically, precisely, with the same attention to detail she brought to calculating a 1,000-yard shot in 15-mile-per-hour crosswinds. She reviewed her curriculum 17 times, identifying every moment where an observer might question her methods. She rehearsed explanations for her teaching techniques until they flowed like muscle memory. She ran practice sessions with her SEAL team until even Wellington, who'd been shooting for 15 years, admitted he was learning things he'd never considered. But beneath all the preparation, beneath the professional competence and the careful planning, there was something else. A weight that settled in her chest at odd moments while running her morning 5 miles, while cleaning her rifles, while lying in bed at 0300, staring at the ceiling and wondering if this evaluation would be the one that finally proved the skeptics right. It wasn't fear of failure. Sarah had failed before, had missed shots that mattered, had made mistakes that cost time and efficiency. Failure was part of the learning process, part of the path to mastery. What sat heavy in her chest was something different, the knowledge that her failure would be used as evidence, not just of her own limitations, but as proof that women didn't belong in this role, that every other woman who came after her would carry the weight of her mistakes in ways her male counterparts never had to consider. It was exhausting, and it was reality. On a Wednesday morning, 3 days before the Quantico course was scheduled to begin, Sarah drove back to Precision Arms. She'd called ahead this time, spoken to Rook Aldridge, directly arranged to pick up the rifle system she'd eventually selected after that first awkward visit. A custom-built precision rifle in .308 fitted with a Schmidt and Bender scope that cost more than some people's cars, mounted on a Macmillan stock that had been hand-bedded to match the barrel harmonics. It was a beautiful piece of equipment, the kind of rifle that made you shoot better just by holding it, not through magic, but through the accumulated expertise of craftsmen who understood that at extreme distances, every detail mattered. The bell chimed as she entered at 13:47 hours. The shop was quieter than last time, only one customer visible, a younger man examining handguns in the case near the register. Rook looked up from behind the counter, and his expression was complicated when he saw her. Relief, maybe, or apprehension, or both. "Chief Brennan," he said, and the title came more naturally now than the patronizing sweetheart of a month ago. "Your rifle's ready. Let me get it from the back." He disappeared through a door behind the counter. Sarah stood in the shop, hands in the pockets of her jeans, studying the walls. The inventory had changed slightly since her last visit. New rifles mounted in the racks, a display case of optics that hadn't been there before. But what caught her attention was something else. A small photograph frame hung near the register, black and white, showing a group of Marines in desert camouflage. Young men, barely more than boys, squinting against Middle Eastern sun. She was still looking at it when Rook returned, carrying a hard case. "Iraq 2004, he said, noticing her attention. "My first deployment as a scout sniper. Half those kids never made it home." He set the case on the counter with practice, the kind of care that said he understood what he was handling. The one in the middle, Corporal Davies, he was 19, wanted to be a teacher after his enlistment, took a round through the neck during an ambush in Fallujah. Rook opened the case, revealing the rifle nestled in foam cutouts. "Every time someone walks through that door, I see him. See all of them. And I think my job is to make sure people have the best equipment possible, the best knowledge, the best chance." He looked up at Sarah, and his eyes were honest in a way they hadn't been a month ago. "That's why what I did to you bothers me so much. I was so busy judging whether you belonged that I forgot what actually matters, making sure the person holding the rifle knows how to use it." Sarah lifted the rifle from the case. It was perfectly balanced, the weight distributed exactly right, the stock fitting her shoulder like it had been built for her body specifically. Which it had been. Rook had taken her measurements during a follow-up visit 2 weeks ago, adjusted the length of pull, modified the cheek rest height, ensured that every point of contact between her and the weapon was optimized for her frame. "This is exceptional work," she said quietly, running her hand along the stock. "That's my daughter." Sarah looked up sharply. "Abby did the stock work?" she asked. Rook nodded. "Been teaching her gunsmithing since she was 15. She's better at it than I ever was. Understands the mathematics of it, the relationship between barrel harmonics and stock bedding, How slight changes in contact points affect accuracy at distance. He paused, something working behind his eyes. I taught her everything about the technical side, everything about the tools and the craft, but I never, he stopped, started again. I never thought she'd want to be the one pulling the trigger. Why not? Sarah asked. Because I'm an idiot, Rook said simply. Because I assumed that teaching her about guns meant she'd want to work on them, not use them. Like assuming you couldn't shoot because you walked in wearing a sundress. The customer near the handgun case had left at some point during this conversation, the bell chiming without Sarah noticing. They were alone in the shop now, surrounded by the tools of precision violence, talking about assumptions and limitations and the ways people put their own fears onto others. She's registered for your Quantico course, Rook said. Called the number you gave her that day. Paid the fee herself, took time off from her job. She's terrified you'll tell her she's not good enough. Is that what you think I'll tell her? I think you'll tell her the truth, Rook said, which is what scares her. Because if someone like you, someone who's proven everything, earned everything, if you tell her she doesn't have what it takes, then it's real. It's not just her father being protective. It's actual limitation. Sarah carefully placed the rifle back in its case, closing the foam padding around it with the same precision Rook had used when opening it. Camp Lejeune, 2007, she said. After the competition, after the petition, after they finally decided to let my scores stand, Senior Chief William Barrett pulled me aside. You remember him? Billy Barrett, Rook said, and something softened in his face. He was my instructor at Scout Sniper School. Best teacher I ever had. He told me something that day, Sarah continued. Camp Lejeune, 2007, she said. After the competition, after the petition, after they finally decided to let my scores stand, Senior Chief William Barrett pulled me aside. You remember him? Billy Barrett, Rook said, and something softened in his face. He was my instructor at Scout Sniper School. Best teacher I ever had. He told me something that day, Sarah continued. He said, Martinez, the hardest part isn't proving you belong. It's maintaining standards after you've proven it. Because the moment you accept lower expectations just to avoid confrontation, you validate every doubt they ever had about you. She met Rook's eyes. That's what I'm going to tell your daughter. Not whether she's good enough, but whether she's willing to hold herself to the standard, even when it would be easier not to. Rook was quiet for a long moment processing this. He said something similar to me, he admitted finally. After Lejeune, I called him angry about your scores counting. Told him the competition was compromised by politics, that you shouldn't have been allowed to compete. What did he say? He said I had two choices, except that a better shooter beat me, or spend the rest of my life making excuses. Then he hung up on me. Rook's voice went rough. I didn't speak to him for 8 years. 8 years I wasted being bitter about a 19-year-old kid who outshot me. When I finally called to apologize, his wife told me he'd died. Training accident, 2023. Saved 2 recruits who'd gotten tangled in rappel lines, but the rope anchor gave way. He was 55. Sarah felt something catch in her chest. She'd known Barrett had died. The whole community had felt that loss. But she hadn't known the details, hadn't known about the recruits he'd saved, hadn't known it had been Rook he'd spoken to about that Lejeune competition. He knew, she said quietly. Knew what? That you'd understand eventually. That you'd have a daughter, that she'd want to shoot, that you'd try to stop her at first, but that you'd remember. She pulled out her phone, navigated to a photo she'd kept for years. Senior Chief William Barrett in dress uniform, white beard, neatly trimmed, eyes crinkled with permanent smile lines, standing next to a much younger Sarah at her instructor's school graduation. 3 months before he died, he told me about you. Said Sarah, one day a man named Rook Aldridge is going to understand. And when he does, he's going to teach his daughter what I taught you. That's how the lesson spreads. Rook stared at the photo and his face went through several expressions before settling on something that might have been grief or might have been wonder. He said that in 23, February 14th, I remember because it was Valentine's Day and I was grumpy about being single, and he told me love wasn't just romantic, it was also about loving the people who came after you enough to teach them right. Rook's hands were shaking slightly as he closed the rifle case, securing the latches with the automatic precision of someone who'd done it 10,000 times. I never got to tell him he was right, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. He knew, Sarah said again. That's the thing about good teachers. They don't need you to tell them. They see it coming years before you do. The conversation settled into silence, but it was a different kind of silence than the awkward tension of a month ago. This was the silence of understanding, of recognition, of two people who'd both been taught by the same man and were only now realizing the scope of his wisdom. Finally, Rook spoke again. The evaluation at Quantico. Abby told me about it, said there would be observers from Naval Special Warfare Group. That's correct, Sarah said. They're evaluating you because you're female. It wasn't a question, but Sarah answered anyway. They're evaluating the program. I'm the instructor, so yes, they're evaluating me. That's not the same thing, and you know it, Rook said. WIST instructors don't get evaluated after 6 months. They get years to prove their programs work. He wasn't wrong. Sarah had known instructors who'd had mediocre results for 3, 4, 5 years before anyone questioned their methods. But she also knew that acknowledging this truth wouldn't change it, and dwelling on unfairness was energy that could be better spent on preparation. What's your point? She asked. My point is that Abby's going to be in that course. And if she struggles, if she makes mistakes, the way every student makes mistakes, those observers are going to use it as evidence that women can't do this work. Yes, Sarah said simply. They probably will. That's not fair to her. No, Sarah agreed. It's not. But fairness and reality are different things. Your daughter is smart enough to understand that. Rook picked up the rifle case, came around the counter, handed it to Sarah with both hands like he was passing her something sacred. Teach her right, he said. Not easy, not with special considerations. The same way Billy Barrett taught you, the same way he taught me. That's the only way I know how to teach, Sarah said. She took the case, tested its weight, nodded satisfaction. The course starts Saturday, 0700 hours. Students should arrive at 0630 for equipment check and safety briefing. If she's late, she doesn't shoot. If her equipment isn't properly maintained, she doesn't shoot. If she's not willing to be corrected in front of the whole class, she doesn't shoot. She'll be ready, Rook said. We'll see, Sarah replied. She turned toward the door, then paused, looking back. Rook, yeah, come watch. Last day of the course, final qualification. Observation deck is open to family. Barrett used to say that the people who love us should see us at our best and our worst because that's when we learn who really supports us. Rook's face did something complicated. I'll be there, he said finally. Sarah nodded and walked out into the afternoon sun. The rifle case felt solid in her hands, properly weighted, containing a tool built specifically for her by someone who'd learned to see past their own assumptions. There was something poetic about that, though Sarah had never been much for poetry. She loaded the case into her truck, securing it carefully, then sat in the driver's seat with the engine off, looking back at Precision Arms through the windshield. Through the window, she could see Rook standing where she'd left him, hands on the counter, head bowed like he was praying or thinking, or maybe just processing the accumulated weight of 18 years of being wrong about something fundamental. People changed, sometimes slowly, sometimes suddenly, but they changed. That was the thing Barrett had understood that took others decades to learn. You couldn't force change, but you could create the conditions where change became inevitable. You could be excellent enough that reality bent around you. You could be patient enough that people had space to confront their own limitations. You could teach. Saturday arrived with the kind of weather that made shooters happy. Clear skies, moderate temperature, wind steady at 8 miles per hour from the northwest. Predictable conditions. The kind that lets you focus on fundamentals without environmental variables complicating everything. Sarah arrived at the Quantico range at 0545, giving herself time to walk the course, check the target placements, ensure that every detail was exactly as it should be. The range stretched out before her, multiple shooting positions at varying distances, steel targets from 300 yards to 800 yards, paper targets for precision grouping. It was a civilian course, so they weren't pushing distances beyond what could be reasonably achieved with a commercial ammunition and standard optics. But within those parameters, Sarah had designed something that would test everything that mattered: position, discipline, breathing control, trigger, technique, wind reading, range, estimation, and the mental fortitude to perform consistently across 3 days of incrementally increasing difficulty. By 0630, students were arriving. Sarah watched them come in, ones and twos, noting details the way she noted everything. A man in his 50s, former military, from his posture, carrying equipment that cost more than most people's monthly salary. A woman in her 40s, nervous but determined, with a rifle that had been well maintained but was probably 15 years old. A younger man, maybe 25, cocky, in the way that suggested he'd been told he was talented and hadn't yet learned the difference between talent and skill. And Abigail Aldridge arriving at Aero 67 in an old Honda with a bumper sticker that said Molin Labe in faded letters. She parked, sat in her car for 30 seconds with her eyes closed. Sarah could see her lips moving, maybe praying, maybe psyching herself up, and then got out and walked toward the range building with her equipment bag over one shoulder. She looked terrified. Sarah let the students settle, let them arrange their gear, and introduce themselves to each other with the awkward politeness of strangers united by a common interest. At 06:58, she stepped to the front of the range classroom and waited. The conversations died naturally as people noticed her standing there. At 0700 exactly, she began. I'm Chief Petty Officer Sarah Brennan, United States Navy, currently serving as a designated marksman instructor for Naval Special Warfare. For the next 3 days, I'm your instructor for this Precision Rifle Fundamentals course. She let that settle, watching faces process the information. Some recognition, some surprise, some skepticism that they tried to hide but didn't quite manage. This course is designed around a simple principle. Precision shooting is a learned skill that requires discipline, consistency, and honest self-assessment. You will make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. The question is whether you're willing to acknowledge those mistakes, understand their causes, and correct them. She moved to the whiteboard, picked up a marker. We'll be covering 5 fundamental areas: position stability, breathing control, trigger, discipline, wind reading, and mental management. Each builds on the others. You can't have good trigger discipline if your position isn't stable. You can't read wind effectively if your breathing is erratic. Everything connects. Sarah wrote the 5 areas on the board in clear block letters. By the end of day 3, you'll shoot a final qualification 5 shots at 600 yards. Paper targets, scored rings. You need a 4-inch group to pass. That's not easy. That's not supposed to be easy. But it's achievable for anyone willing to do the work. She turned back to face the class. Questions. A hand went up, the cocky younger man. Yeah, Chief, I've been shooting since I was 12. Competed in high school. How much of this is going to be basic stuff I already know? Sarah looked at him for a long moment. All of it, she said flatly, because the fundamentals are fundamental. I've been shooting professionally for 18 years, and I still drill basics every single day. The difference between good shooters and great shooters isn't that great shooters know advanced techniques. It's that great shooters have fundamentals so deeply ingrained they become automatic. She paused. But if you think you have mastered the basics and don't need this course, you are welcome to leave now. Full refund, no judgment. The young man's face went red. He didn't leave. Anyone else? Sarah asked. No more hands. Good. Safety brief, then we're on the range. The morning passed in the rhythm of instruction: demonstrate, observe, correct, repeat. Sarah moved among the students with the economical precision of someone who'd done this hundreds of times, watching stance and grip and breathing, offering corrections that were specific and technical and devoid of judgment. Your right elbow is too high. Drop it 2 inches. There. Now your shoulder pocket is properly aligned and you're anticipating recoil. See how you tense right before the shot. That's pushing your muzzle down. Relax. Trust the position. Good wind call, but you're not accounting for the vertical component. Wind at an angle doesn't just push the bullet sideways, it also affects drop. Add 0.2 mils elevation. By lunch, hierarchy had emerged the way it always did. The former military guy turned out he'd been Army infantry, not a sniper, but combat experienced, was solid and consistent. The nervous woman in her 40s was surprisingly good, better than her equipment should have allowed, which meant her fundamentals were excellent. The cocky young man was talented but erratic, making shots that looked impressive, but couldn't be replicated because he didn't understand his own process. And Abby Aldridge was struggling, not catastrophically. Her position was good, her equipment well-maintained, her attitude focused. But something was off in her shot process, something subtle that was causing her groups to spread wider than they should. Sarah watched her through the afternoon sessions, noting the pattern. 3 shots clustered tight, then the fourth would be high and right, then the fifth would come back to center. It was a breathing problem. Had to be. But not the obvious breathing problems beginners had. This was something more nuanced, something in the timing between respiration and trigger break. At 16:30, Sarah called end of day. Students began packing their equipment, conversations starting up as the focus of shooting gave way to the social dynamics of shared experience. Sarah watched Abby gather her gear with mechanical precision, her face carefully neutral, in a way that suggested she was working very hard not to show disappointment. "Aldridge," Sarah called. Abby's head snapped up. "Yes, Chief. Range maintenance. I need someone to help pull targets and reset steel. You volunteered." It wasn't a question. Abby's face showed she understood this. "Yes, Chief," she said again. The other students filtered out, heading to their bays or the base lodging where some were staying. Within 10 minutes, the range was empty, except for Sarah and Abby standing in the afternoon sun with the smell of gunpowder still hanging in the air. "Walk me through your shot process," Sarah said without preamble. Abby blinked. "My shot process. From the moment you settle into position to the moment the round leaves the barrel. Talk me through exactly what you're doing." Abby took a breath, organized her thoughts. "I get into position, settle the rifle, find my natural point of aim. Then I start my breathing cycle, 2 normal breaths. Then on the third exhale, I pause, hold steady, and break the trigger." "Show me," Sarah said. "No rifle. Just show me the breathing." Abby demonstrated 2 breaths, then a pause on the exhale, then a simulated trigger press. Sarah watched closely, seeing it now. On that third breath, right before the pause, Abby's shoulders were elevating slightly. Not much, maybe half an inch. But at 600 yards, half an inch of movement translated to inches of deviation on target. "Again," Sarah said, "but this time I'm going to put my hand on your right shoulder. Don't let me feel it move." Abby repeated the process. Sarah's hand on her shoulder felt the movement. She'd seen that slight elevation right before the respiratory pause. "You're tensing," Sarah said, "right before you commit to the shot. Your body is preparing for recoil, and that preparation is throwing your position off." "I don't understand," Abby said. "I'm holding my breath. How can I be tensing?" "Because holding your breath requires muscle control," Sarah explained, "and your body is connecting that muscle control with anticipation of the shot. It's happening unconsciously, which is why you can't feel it." She demonstrated on herself, breathing normally, then showing the difference between a relaxed respiratory pause and a tense one. The fix is to separate the breathing from the shot. Stop thinking of them as one action. Instead, establish your respiratory pause, then count 3 heartbeats, then break the trigger. That extra second lets your body understand that the breath hold isn't the signal for recoil. Abby's face showed concentration as she processed this. 3 heartbeats, she repeated. "Try it." Abby went through the process again. This time, Sarah's hand on her shoulder felt no movement. "Better," Sarah said. "Tomorrow morning, first thing, we'll test it with live fire. If the diagnosis is right, your groups will tighten immediately." "And if they don't," Abby asked quietly, "then we try something else," Sarah said. "That's how this works. Shooting isn't magic. It's systematic problem solving applied to ballistics. You identify the issue, you test a solution, you assess the results. If the results aren't what you wanted, you adjust and try again." She paused, looking at Abby directly. "Your father's watching you fail," she said, and her tone was matter-of-fact rather than cruel. "That's what you're thinking right now, that everyone else is shooting better, and he's going to see it and know he was right about you not being good enough." Abby's face confirmed the accuracy of this assessment. "Here's what you need to understand," Sarah continued. "I don't care what your father thinks. I don't care what anyone in that class thinks. I care whether you're willing to do the work to identify and fix your problems. That's the only thing that matters. Can you diagnose your weaknesses and systematically address them?" "But what if I can't?" The question came out small, younger than Abby's 22 years. "Then you can't," Sarah said simply. "Not everyone has what it takes for precision shooting." That's not a moral judgment. That's just reality. Some people don't have the visual acuity. Some don't have the patience. Some don't have the body awareness to feel what they're doing wrong. She let that sit for a moment. "But I don't think you're one of those people. I think you're someone who's been told their whole life that they're not good enough, and now you're so busy proving that belief wrong that you can't relax enough to perform naturally. Abby was quiet processing this. Senior Chief Barrett told me something once, Sarah said. He said the students who succeed aren't the ones with the most talent. They're the ones who can fail in front of others without their ego getting involved, because only then can you actually learn. She started walking toward her truck, then paused and looked back. Tomorrow morning, first shooting position. Be there at 0645. We'll work through this before the rest of the class arrives. Chief, Abby's voice stopped her. Why are you helping me? Sarah considered the question, considered all the possible answers, settled on the truth. Because someone helped me once when I was 19 years old and 47 men had just signed a petition saying I didn't belong. And that help changed everything. That's what we do. We pass it forward. She drove home as the sun set over Quantico, thinking about Barrett and Rook and Abby and the strange geometry of how lessons move through time. How a man who died 2 years ago was still teaching people through the students he'd influenced. How a moment of grace at Camp Lejeune in 2007 was echoing forward into 2025, rippling outward in ways no one could have predicted. That night, Sarah cleaned her rifles with the meditative focus that the task required and thought about the evaluation observers who would be watching in 2 days. Thought about all the ways this could go wrong, all the ways one student's struggle could be used as evidence against an entire program. But mostly she thought about Abby Aldridge showing up tomorrow at 0645, willing to fail in front of her instructor one more time in the hope of learning something that would let her succeed. That willingness was what separated people who got better from people who stayed the same. Sarah knew which category Abby fell into. Now Abby just needed to learn it for herself. Dawn came to Quantico with the kind of crystalline clarity that made shooters believe in providence. Sarah arrived at 0615, 30 minutes before her appointment with Abby, wanting time to walk the range in solitude and center herself before the day began. The grass was wet with dew, the air cool enough that her breath showed in small clouds. In 2 hours, the evaluation observers from Naval Special Warfare Group would arrive. In 4 hours, they would watch her teach. In 6 hours, they would begin forming opinions that might determine whether she continued as an instructor or was quietly reassigned to some administrative role where her gender wouldn't be an issue. She didn't think about that. Thinking about it wouldn't change it. Instead, she thought about the fundamentals: position, breathing, trigger wind, mental management. Everything else was noise. Abby arrived at 0642, 3 minutes early, carrying her rifle case in a thermos of what smelled like coffee strong enough to strip paint. Her eyes had the particular redness that suggested she hadn't slept well, but her hands were steady as she set up her equipment at the firing position Sarah indicated. Thank you for doing this, Chief, Abby said as she assembled her rifle with practiced efficiency. Don't thank me yet, Sarah replied. We're going to find out if my diagnosis was right. If it wasn't, we wasted both our time. She had Abby settle into position, reminded her of the correction established respiratory, pause, count 3 heartbeats, then break the trigger. The target was at 400 yards, a comfortable distance, where the difference between good technique and flawed technique would be immediately obvious. 5 rounds, Sarah said. Take your time. I want to see process, not speed. Abby's first shot broke clean. Sarah, watching through her spotting scope, saw the impact low and left of center, expected for a cold barrel and a shooter still settling into her position. The second shot moved right and up closer to center. The third shot was nearly perfect, just half an inch right of the bullseye. Then the fourth shot, where yesterday the pattern would have fallen apart. Sarah watched Abby go through her breathing cycle, saw the pause, counted the heartbeats herself, 1, 2, 3, and the shot broke with the same smooth precision as the third. Impact quarter-inch left of the third shot. Essentially the same hole. The fifth shot matched them. 3 shots in a group smaller than a $50 at 400 yards. Abby came off the rifle slowly, and her hands were shaking now in a way they hadn't been while shooting. Not from nerves. From the adrenaline of success, from the realization that something that had been wrong was now right. That's a .3 MOA group, Sarah said, doing the mathematics automatically. With your equipment from field position, cold barrel. That's not beginner shooting, Aldridge. That's legitimately excellent shooting. Abby was staring at her rifle like she'd never seen it before. I don't understand. Yesterday I couldn't. Yesterday you were fighting yourself, Sarah interrupted. Today you trusted the process. That's the entire difference. She stood brushing grass from her jeans. The other students will arrive in 40 minutes. When they do, you're going to shoot just like you did now. Same process, same discipline, same results. Your father will be here for final qualification tomorrow. You're going to show him this. Understood? Yes, Chief, Abby said, and her voice carried a note of something that might have been hope or might have been determination or might have been both. By 0730, the full class had assembled, and with them came the observers. Two of them, a Navy captain named Morrison, who Sarah recognized from command briefings, but had never spoken to directly, and a senior enlisted man, a master chief named Patterson, who had a reputation for being old school in ways that made some people nostalgic and others uncomfortable. They set up in the observation tower, with notepads and binoculars watching everything saying nothing. Sarah taught like she always taught, methodically, patiently, with corrections that were specific and technical. She demonstrated the relationship between stock weld and eye relief, showed how a quarter-inch difference in cheek placement could cause parallax errors at distance. She had students dry fire until their trigger press was smooth enough that a coin balanced on their barrel wouldn't fall. She explained the mathematics of wind drift in ways that made the physics intuitive rather than abstract. And through it all, she was aware of the observers watching how she communicated with students, watching how she handled corrections, watching almost certainly for evidence that a female instructor couldn't command the respect or attention of a mixed-gender class that included men twice her age. She didn't perform for them. Performing was what people did when they were insecure about their competence. She simply taught the same way she'd taught for 6 months, the same way Barrett had taught her to teach, with absolute commitment to the idea that the mission of instruction mattered more than the ego of the instructor. By midday, the class had progressed to shooting from improvised positions over barricades from rooftops around obstacles. This was where discipline separated from luck. Anyone could shoot well from a perfect bench rest position. But could you maintain the same fundamentals when your body was contorted, when the rifle was canted, when the position was uncomfortable and your muscles were fatiguing? The former Army infantry guy, his name was Marcus, handled it naturally, his combat experience showing in how quickly he adapted to awkward positions. The nervous woman, whose name was Catherine, struggled at first but showed remarkable problem-solving, figuring out ways to brace her rifle that weren't in any manual, but worked perfectly for her body mechanics. The cocky young man, Derek, fought every position that didn't feel comfortable, insisted his way was better, and shot progressively worse groups as the day went on. Sarah watched this with clinical detachment, knowing that some people learned through patient explanation and others learned only through the undeniable feedback of missing targets. And Abby shot consistently, methodically, with the kind of steady improvement that marked someone who'd internalized a correction and was now building on that foundation. At 15:30, during a water break, Captain Morrison descended from the observation tower. He walked with the particular stride of senior officers, not rushed, not slow, conveying that his time was valuable, but he wasn't worried about it. He stopped near Sarah, watching the students reset their equipment for the next drill. "Chief Brennan," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir," Sarah replied, coming to a position that wasn't quite attention, but wasn't casual either. "Interesting teaching methodology. Very hands-on, very detailed." "Yes, sir. Precision shooting requires precision instruction." Morrison nodded slowly, his eyes still on the students. "The Aldridge girl, that's Rook Aldridge's daughter." "Yes, sir." "Rook and I went through Scout Sniper School together, 1996. Good Marine. Solid instructor before he retired." Sarah said nothing, waiting to see where this was going. "He called me last week," Morrison continued. "Asked if I was one of the observers for your evaluation. When I confirmed, he said something interesting. He said, 'Captain, if you're looking for reasons to shut down Chief Brennan's program, you'll find them. But you'll be making the same mistake I made for 18 years. Morrison turned to look at Sarah directly now. I asked him what mistake that was. He said, "Confusing my own limitations with someone else's potential." The words hung in the afternoon air. Sarah kept her expression neutral, professional, giving Morrison nothing to read. "Your student with the attitude problem," Morrison said, nodding toward Derek, who was arguing with Marcus about something technical. "He's going to fail qualification tomorrow." "Probably," Sarah agreed. "Does that concern you?" It concerns me that he's not willing to accept correction, but I can't learn for him. I can only provide the opportunity to learn. Morrison considered this. And the Aldridge girl, will she pass? If she maintains her current trajectory, yes, sir. But qualification is tomorrow. Anything can happen between now and then. Fair answer, Morrison said. He started to walk away, then paused. For what it's worth, Chief, I signed the petition at Camp Lejeune in 2007. I was one of the 47. Thought it was about maintaining standards. Took me years to realize it was about protecting my ego. He didn't wait for a response, just walked back to the observation tower, leaving Sarah standing alone with the weight of that confession. The day ended at 1700. Students left tired and satisfied, already talking about tomorrow's qualification with the mixture of excitement and nervousness that marked people who understood they were about to be tested. Sarah spent an hour after they departed walking the range one final time, checking target placements, ensuring that every detail for tomorrow was exactly as it should be. When she finally climbed into her truck at 18:15, she was exhausted in the way that teaching always exhausted her, not physically but mentally, from the constant vigilance of watching 12 students simultaneously tracking their progress, adjusting her instruction to meet individual needs while maintaining collective standards. Her phone buzzed as she started the engine. A text from Master Chief Blackwood. Heard Morrison was there today. How'd it go? Sarah typed back. Professional, he's watching. We'll see. The response came immediately. You've got this, Chief. Team believes in you. She appreciated the sentiment even if belief didn't change outcomes. Tomorrow would be what it would be. Students would shoot, would pass, or fail based on their skill and discipline, and observers would draw whatever conclusions they were predisposed to draw. All Sarah could control was the quality of her instruction and the integrity of her standards. She drove home, ate a dinner she didn't taste, cleaned rifles that didn't need cleaning, and went to bed at 2100 with her alarm set for 0445. Sleep came eventually, dreamless and deep, the sleep of someone whose conscience was clear about their preparation. Saturday morning arrived with weather that was nearly identical to the day before, clearer, cool winds steady from the northwest at 7 miles per hour. Sarah went through her morning routine with the mechanical precision of ritual, arrived at Quantico at 0600, and had the range fully prepared by the time the first students arrived at 0645. The observation tower held 4 people now, instead of 2. Morrison and Patterson had been joined by a Navy commander Sarah didn't recognize, and a civilian woman who might have been from the Inspector General's office or might have been from something else entirely. More eyes, more judgment, more pressure on every student to perform, and by extension, more pressure on Sarah to have prepared them adequately. The qualification was straightforward: 5 shots at 600 yards, paper targets, with scored rings, 4-inch maximum group to pass. Students would shoot in alphabetical order, which meant Abby would go first. Sarah gathered the class at 0730 and explained the standards one final time. This is not a competition against each other. This is you demonstrating mastery of the fundamentals we've worked on for 3 days. I don't care if your group is 4 inches or 1 inch as long as it meets the passing standard. Pressure comes from comparing yourself to others. Excellence comes from comparing yourself to the standard. She let that settle. Aldridge, you're first. Everyone else, observation positions. Watch what she does right and learn from it. Watch what she does wrong and learn from that too. Abby moved to the firing line with her equipment, and Sarah saw that her hands were shaking slightly as she set up. Not from technical incompetence, her rifle assembly was smooth and practiced. From nerves, from awareness that she was shooting first, that everyone was watching, that her father would be here soon and would see whatever happened next. Sarah walked over, keeping her voice low. 3 days ago, you walked onto this range thinking you had to prove something. What do you think you have to prove now? Abby was quiet for a moment, thinking about the question. That I can execute the fundamentals under pressure, she said finally. Good answer, Sarah said. Now do that. She stepped back, giving Abby space. The observation tower was silent, binoculars trained on the target 600 yards downrange. Abby settled into position with the deliberate care Sarah had drilled into the entire class. Found her natural point of aim, adjusted her body until the crosshairs settled on target without muscular force. Loaded 5 rounds. Began her breathing cycle. The first shot broke clean, Sarah, watching through her spotting scope, saw the impact 3 inches right of center within the passing standard, but not exceptional. Second shot, 2 inches left of center, opposite side of the target, but still within the 4 inch group requirement. Third shot, 1 inch right of the first shot. The group was holding together. Fourth shot, the one that had been problematic for days. Sarah watched Abby go through the breathing cycle, saw the pause, knew she was counting heartbeats. The shot broke and the impact was half an inch below the first shot, still in the group. Fifth shot directly between the first and fourth shots. Sarah did the mental mathematics before pulling out her measuring tool. The group spanned 3.2 inches from the widest separation of impacts, well within the passing standard. "Cease fire," Sarah called. "Aldridge, clear your weapon and step back." She walked down range with the measuring tool, making the assessment official, even though she'd already calculated the result. When she returned, she called out in a voice that carried to the observation tower, "Aldridge, 3.2-inch group at 600 yards. Pass." Abby's face showed relief so intense it was almost painful to witness. But she kept her composure, simply said, "Thank you, Chief," and moved to the observation area to make room for the next shooter. The qualification continued through the morning. Marcus shot a 2.8-inch group, the best of the day so far, with the calm precision of someone who'd been tested in ways that made range qualification seem trivial. Catherine struggled, took her full allotted time, but managed a 3.9-inch group that made her pump her fist in celebration when Sarah called the measurement. Others passed with varying margins, some comfortable, some barely making the standard. Derek shot last. His group measured 6.3 inches. Fail. He argued, said the wind had shifted, said his rifle had developed a mechanical issue, said the targets weren't the same quality as what the earlier shooters had used. Sarah listened without expression, then said simply, "You had the same conditions as everyone else, and you chose to use equipment you hadn't verified. Those are choices. They have consequences. You can retake the qualification next quarter if you want to register again." Derek left angry and Sarah didn't care. Some people learned. Some people made excuses. She couldn't control which category someone fell into. By 11:45, the qualification was complete. 11 of 12 students had passed. Sarah called them together for final remarks. "3 days ago, you walked onto this range with varying levels of skill and experience. Today, you have all demonstrated, most of you, that precision shooting is a learnable discipline. It's not magic. It's not talent. It's systematic application of correct fundamentals under pressure." She paused, looking at each face. "Some of you will continue to develop these skills. Some of you will put your rifles in a closet and not touch them for months. That's your choice. But if you do continue, remember that the fundamentals never stop being important. I've been shooting for 18 years and I still drill basics every day. The moment you think you've mastered something is the moment you stop improving." She dismissed them, watched as they began packing equipment and exchanging contact information with the particular camaraderie of people who'd shared a challenging experience. Abby was talking with Catherine, both of them smiling in the way that marked shared success. Sarah started breaking down the range equipment, stacking targets, policing brass, doing the unglamorous work that came after every training evolution. She was aware of the observers descending from the tower, walking toward her, but she didn't stop working. The range needed to be cleaned. That was the standard. Captain Morrison reached her first. "Chief Brennan, a word." Sarah straightened, turned to face him and the other 3 observers. "Yes, sir." Morrison glanced at his companions, then back to Sarah. "We've completed our evaluation of your instruction program. Our report will be filed with Naval Special Warfare Group by the end of next week. But I wanted to tell you directly, your instruction methodology is sound, your standards are appropriate, and your results speak for themselves. 11 of 12 students passing with the failure clearly attributable to the student's attitude rather than instructional deficiency." He paused, and something in his expression softened slightly. "I came here expecting to find problems. I was wrong. Your program will receive a recommendation for continuation." The relief that hit Sarah was physical, like someone had been pressing on her chest and suddenly released the pressure. But she kept her voice professional. "Thank you, sir. I appreciate the thorough evaluation." "Don't thank me, Chief. You did the work. We just watched." Morrison nodded to the others and they began walking back toward their vehicle. Sarah stood alone on the range, surrounded by the debris of 3 days of training and let herself feel the exhaustion and relief in equal measure. The test was over. She'd passed. The program would continue. A voice behind her made her turn. Chief Brennan Rook Aldridge stood at the edge of the range wearing jeans and a button-down shirt that looked like he'd bought it specifically for today. His face was difficult to read, hope and fear, and something else competing for dominance. "Rook," Sarah said, "you made it. I told you I'd be here for final qualification. But I got caught in traffic arrived just as they were finishing." He hesitated. "How did Abby do, Tim?" "See for yourself," Sarah said, gesturing toward where Abby was loading her truck. "She passed. 3.2-inch group." Rook's face did something complicated, cycling through emotions too quickly to name them all individually. "She passed," he repeated like he needed to hear it out loud to believe it. "She did more than pass," Sarah said. "She demonstrated consistent technical improvement across 3 days, accepted correction without ego, and performed under pressure. Those are the marks of someone who has what it takes." Rook was quiet for a long moment processing this. "I was wrong," he said finally. "About her, about you, about what I thought I knew about who could do this work." "Yes," Sarah agreed simply. "You were, but you learned. That's what matters." She picked up a stack of targets, started carrying them toward her truck. "Billy Barrett told me something once," she continued. "He said the measure of a teacher isn't whether they know things. It's whether they can change their mind when reality shows them they're wrong. He said you'd figure it out eventually." Looks like he was right. Rook followed her, helped carry equipment without being asked. "I never got to apologize to him," he said, "for Camp Lejeune, for the petition, for wasting 8 years being bitter about something that didn't matter." "He knew," Sarah said. "That's the thing about good teachers. They don't need the apology. They just need to know the lesson landed eventually." They worked in silence for a few minutes, loading Sarah's truck with the accumulated gear of 3 days of instruction. When they finished, Rook extended his hand. "Thank you," he said, "for teaching her right, for not going easy just because she's my daughter or because you're both women or any other bullshit reason that wouldn't have served her." Sarah shook his hand, noting that his grip was firm, but not aggressive, the handshake of equals, rather than the handshake of someone trying to prove something. "That's the only way I know how to teach," she said. Rook nodded, started to leave, then turned back. "The shop. Precision Arms. I'm starting a program. Barrett Method Precision Training. Monthly courses for anyone who wants to learn. No prerequisites, no judgments, just solid instruction based on what Billy taught us." He paused and his eyes were serious. "I want Abby to help me teach it. She's better at explaining the technical aspects than I am, more patient. And I think she needs to see herself as an instructor, not just as someone trying to prove she belongs." "That's good," Sarah said. "She'll be excellent at it." "Will you come?" Rook asked. "First course is in 6 weeks. Guest instructor spot. I'd like students to see what right looks like at the highest level." Sarah considered this. She'd be back in her regular training cycle by then, working with her SEAL team, running them through drills and scenarios, and the constant refinement that kept them sharp. But 1 weekend in 6 weeks, that was manageable. That was part of passing the lesson forward. "Send me the details," she said. "I'll be there." Rook smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him, unguarded and warm. "He'd be proud of both of you," he said quietly. "Billy, he'd see what we're building and know his lessons were spreading the way he hoped they would." After Rook left, Sarah finished securing her equipment and sat in her truck for a moment before starting the engine. Through the windshield, she could see Abby and Rook standing by Abby's Honda talking. Their body language had changed from the tension she'd witnessed a month ago at Precision Arms. Now they stood close, Rook's hand on his daughter's shoulder, both of them smiling. Talking not as instructor and failing student, but as father and daughter who'd found their way back to each other through the unexpected medium of precision rifle shooting. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from Master Chief Blackwood. "Morrison called, said you passed with flying colors. Whole team wants to buy you a beer. When are you back?" She typed, "Tomorrow. Save the beer for after our next training cycle. We've got work to do." The response was immediate. "Roger that, Chief. Proud of you." Sarah started the truck, pulled out of the Quantico range, and headed toward the interstate. The afternoon sun was warm through the windshield, and she felt a particular satisfaction that came from completing something difficult and doing it right. Not perfectly, Derek had failed, which meant her instruction hadn't reached everyone. But 11 of 12 was a strong outcome. More importantly, the students who'd passed had genuinely earned it through discipline and work rather than lowered standards or special consideration. She thought about Barrett, about how he'd seen pattern decades before they manifested, how he'd known that Rook would eventually understand, that Abby would eventually push back against her father's limitations, that Sarah would eventually need to teach others the way he'd taught her. It was almost supernatural, except it wasn't supernatural at all. It was just deep understanding of human nature combined with faith that people could change when given the right conditions. The drive back to Virginia Beach took 90 minutes through Saturday traffic. Sarah spent it in comfortable silence, her mind already shifting forward to next week's training schedule with her team. They'd be working on urban precision shots, engaging targets from elevated positions through window frames around structural obstacles. It was technically demanding work that required all the fundamentals she'd been teaching civilians, plus the added complexity of tactical considerations. She'd have to review the observer report when it came through official channels, identify any noted deficiencies or areas for improvement. Even a positive evaluation typically included suggestions for refinement. That was part of the process. You never stopped improving, never stopped learning, never reached a point where you knew everything. Barrett had taught her that, kept teaching it even after his death through the lessons he'd planted in dozens of students who carried them forward. 6 months later, on a cold November morning, Sarah returned to Precision Arms for Rook's first Barrett Method precision training course. The shop had changed in subtle ways. The wall behind the counter now featured photographs of Barrett, including the one from his instructor, days at Scout Sniper School, young and intense, and already showing the wisdom that would define his teaching career. Next to Barrett's photos were images from the Quantico qualification course, including one of Abby celebrating her passing group. The course had 12 students ranging from 18 to 65, 6 women and 6 men. Rook taught the morning session, and Sarah watched him work with a patience and precision that would have made Barrett proud. He didn't condescend. He didn't assume. He evaluated each student individually and adjusted his instruction to meet their needs. Abby taught the afternoon technical session, explaining ballistic coefficients and wind deflection with a clarity that made complex mathematics intuitive. She had her father's directness, but none of his former prejudices, treating every student's question as legitimate, regardless of how basic it might be. During the lunch break, a young woman approached Sarah nervously. She was maybe 20, wearing a college sweatshirt with hands that showed calluses from regular training. "Chief Brennan, I'm Sophia Reeves. I saw your videos online from the Quantico course. I've been wanting to learn precision shooting, but every time I went to ranges, instructors treated me like I didn't belong. I was about to give up, and then I found out about this program." She paused, struggling with something. "I just wanted to say thank you for showing that this is possible, for teaching in a way that focuses on skill instead of who people think should have that skill." Sarah looked at this young woman, saw herself at 19, saw all the students she'd taught and would teach, saw the ripple effect of Barrett's lesson spreading outward through time and space. "Don't thank me," she said. "Just shoot well, then teach someone else. That's how this works." Sophia nodded understanding and walked back to her equipment. Rook appeared beside Sarah, watching his students set up for the afternoon session. 12 students today," he said. "Next month, I've got 20 registered. The month after, I might need to run 2 courses, word spreading." "That's good," Sarah said. "Abby's applying to Marine Officer Candidate School," Rook continued, and his voice held something that might have been pride, or might have been fear, or might have been both. "If she gets in, she'll pursue the infantry officer route with a specialty designation toward Scout Sniper." He paused. "I'm terrified for her, but I'm not trying to stop her anymore. Figure that's progress." "It is," Sarah agreed. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the next generation of shooters prepare for an afternoon of instruction. Sarah would teach the final session, advanced fundamentals, the refinements that separated good shooters from great ones. Then she'd drive back to Virginia Beach, back to her team, back to the work that defined her. But standing here watching Rook and Abby teach with the patience and precision they'd learned from Barrett's lineage, Sarah felt something she rarely allowed herself to feel: satisfaction. Not pride. Pride was too self-focused. Satisfaction that the work was continuing, that the lessons were spreading, that excellence was being passed forward through generations of students who would themselves become teachers. Her phone buzzed. A text from Wellington. "Chief, new guys arrived early. They're asking when you'll be back to start their training. Sarah smiled and typed back, tomorrow, 0700. Tell them to be ready. She finished the afternoon session at Precision Arms, teaching 12 students the subtle refinements of trigger control that took years to master. She watched Sophia Reeves absorb every word with the intensity of someone who'd found something they'd been searching for. She saw Abby watching from the instructor area, taking mental notes on Sarah's teaching methods, preparing for her own future as an instructor and officer. As the course ended and students began packing their equipment, Rook approached one final time. Same time next month, he asked. If I can make it work, Sarah said. Training schedule gets complicated. I understand. But when you can, the students need to see what right looks like at the highest level. Sarah loaded her truck as the sun set over Virginia Beach, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that would have made for difficult shooting conditions, but made for beautiful endings. She thought about Barrett one more time, about the lesson he'd taught that was still teaching itself through everyone he'd influenced. The lesson was simple. Excellence had no prerequisites except willingness to work. Respect wasn't given based on appearance or assumptions. It was earned through demonstrated competence. And the greatest achievement wasn't your own success, but creating the conditions where others could succeed. She'd learned that lesson at 19, had spent 18 years proving it, would spend the rest of her career teaching it to anyone willing to learn. Because that was what you did. You passed it forward. Sarah drove into the gathering darkness, heading toward home, toward rest, toward tomorrow when she'd begin again with a new group of students who needed to learn what she knew. The work was never finished. The lesson was never complete. There would always be someone who needed to be taught, someone who'd been dismissed or underestimated, someone who just needed one person to look past their assumptions and see potential. She could be that person, had been that person, would continue being that person for as long as she wore the uniform. Behind her, Precision Arms stood illuminated in the evening light, and its windows showing Rook and Abby cleaning equipment, preparing for next month's course, continuing the work that Barrett had started decades ago. The lesson spreading outward, rippling through time, touching lives in ways that none of them could fully measure, but all of them could feel. Excellence had no gender. Assumptions were the enemy of truth. And the greatest achievement was lighting the path for those who followed. 3 years later, Sarah Catherine Brennan stood at the entrance of Marine Corps Scout Sniper School in Quantico, wearing her dress blues with the Navy Cross ribbon bright against the dark fabric. She wasn't here as an instructor today. She was here as a witness. The ceremony was small, only graduates' families and a handful of senior officers. But when they called the name Second Lieutenant Abigail Aldridge, and Abby stepped forward to receive her Scout Sniper designation, Sarah saw Rook in the front row, tears streaming down his face without shame. Behind sat an empty chair with a folded uniform jacket, Marine Corps Scout Sniper insignia, name tape reading Barrett. A tradition Rook had started honoring the teacher who'd never lived to see the legacy he'd built. After the ceremony, Abby found Sarah near the parking lot. "Chief Brennan," she said, then caught herself. "Sorry, Master Chief Brennan now. Congratulations on the promotion." Sarah waved it off. "Congratulations yourself, Lieutenant. How does it feel?" Abby was quiet for a moment, looking back at the school building. "Like I'm standing on the shoulders of people who saw something in me before I saw it in myself," she said finally. "Barrett, you, even my dad eventually." "That's exactly right," Sarah said. "Now comes the hard part, being that person for someone else." Abby smiled. "Already started. There's a kid in my platoon, Corporal Reeves, Sophia Reeves. Says she learned to shoot at Precision Arms, inspired by some Navy SEAL instructor who changed her life." Sarah felt something catch in her chest, recognition, satisfaction, the strange geometry of lessons moving through time. "Small world," she said quietly. "Small community," Abby corrected. "People who believe excellence matters more than assumptions. People who pass it forward." She saluted, sharp, precise, respectful. Sarah returned it. As Abby walked back to her family, Sarah stood alone in the Virginia afternoon, watching the next generation step into roles that had been closed to them not so long ago. The work wasn't finished. The lesson wasn't complete. But it was spreading, rippling outward in ways that Senior Chief William Barrett had seen coming decades before anyone else. Excellence had no gender. Assumptions were the enemy of truth. And the greatest achievement was lighting the path for those who followed. Sarah had learned it at 19, proven it at 37, And at 40, she was teaching it to anyone willing to learn.